All right, let's get right into this. We're looking at a massive, entirely sudden escalation in the Middle East today, one that has completely shattered the region's already fragile peace efforts. For months, the whole world has essentially been holding its breath under this interim agreement to halt the war with Iran. But today, well, we're breaking down a rapid-fire series of events that has officially thrown all that diplomatic progress right out the window. U.S. President Donald Trump has officially declared the interim peace agreement over. And obviously, a declaration like that doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It comes directly on the heels of a huge new wave of military exchanges that have reignited an active theater of war. So, in this explainer, we're going to stick strictly to the facts, the timelines, and the immediate global fallout of this collapsed deal.
The sheer abruptness of this diplomatic reversal is just staggering. While speaking to reporters ahead of the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, President Trump was asked point-blank if the recent Memorandum of Understanding was dead. His definitive response? To me, I think it's over. They're scum. He went on to basically call dealing with them a complete waste of time. And the main thing you should really take away from this is just how sharp a pivot this actually is. I mean, think about it. Just last month, President Trump was out there publicly stating that Iran's new leadership was far less radicalized, and he actually spoke quite favorably of the new Iranian Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. So this latest statement in Ankara, it represents a complete, literally 180-degree turn from those previous diplomatic hopes.
To truly grasp how fast things are moving right now, let's quickly ground ourselves in the recent history. On February 28th, we saw the sudden outbreak of war following joint U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. Then, months of intense conflict followed right up until June, when a critical Memorandum of Understanding was signed, effectively putting a temporary ceasefire in place. And that brings us right to today, where that very ceasefire has completely collapsed. Going from open war to a ceasefire and then straight back into conflict in just a matter of months is a kind of geopolitical whiplash that's sending shockwaves around the entire globe.
Okay, moving on to Section 1, breaking the ceasefire and the catalysts behind it.
You see, diplomatic deals of this magnitude, they don't just evaporate without a spark. And the initial flashpoint here centers around the number 3. Specifically, 3 commercial tankers. According to the Pentagon, Iran launched attacks on 3 commercial tankers that were navigating the Strait of Hormuz. Now, why does this matter so much? Well, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most vital shipping lanes on the entire planet. Any disruption there doesn't just affect the specific countries involved, it literally disrupts the flow of global trade. The harassment of these 3 vessels is exactly what the U.S. cited as the immediate trigger for what unfolded next.
Right after those tanker attacks, the United States launched a massive wave of retaliatory military strikes. U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, reported that their operations heavily targeted the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Specifically, they hit more than 60 of their small boats. 60. That is a highly concentrated, large-scale tactical strike designed, at least in CENTCOM's own words, to impose a heavy cost on Iran for what the U.S. called a clear and very dangerous violation of the ceasefire. But the retaliation wasn't strictly military. It was economic too, and that's something that impacts literally everyone watching this explainer. At the exact same time as those military strikes, the U.S. officially revoked a critical license that had been allowing Iran to sell oil under the interim agreement. And the financial markets? They reacted instantly. Global oil prices surged by more than 3%, hitting a 2-week high. When military action suddenly chokes off major oil supply lines and nullifies diplomatic trade agreements, the economic fallout is immediate, and it is entirely global.
Which brings us to Section 2, Retaliation and Strategic Hubs.
Because, of course, the escalation absolutely did not end with the U.S. strikes. What we're looking at now is a rapidly widening geographic theater of conflict. Iran's response was incredibly swift. They launched a joint missile and drone operation directly targeting major American military bases in neighboring Gulf states. Air raid sirens were going off as Iran's Revolutionary Guards claimed successful strikes on Bandar Salman and the 5th Naval District over in Bahrain, as well as the Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait. But simultaneously, deep inside Iran, explosions rocked multiple strategic coastal cities: Qeshm Island, Bandar Abbas, and most crucially, Karg Island. Karg Island is huge. It's Iran's primary oil hub, and it handles 90% of the country's crude exports. So the geographical footprint of this conflict expanded massively basically overnight.
Now, as it almost always happens in active conflict zones, we've got conflicting damage reports coming in, and it's absolutely vital we look at both impartially. U.S. officials are stating that their strikes broadly targeted military infrastructure, things like air defense systems, surface-to-air missiles, drone launch sites, and coastal surveillance. However, on the other side, Iranian state media is claiming that an enemy projectile actually hit a commercial fishing pier in the southern city of Strait, resulting in shrapnel injuries, though they did report no civilian fatalities. Furthermore, Iran claims they successfully shot down an American MQ-9 Reaper drone that was attempting to intercept their operations. The fog of war is incredibly thick here, to say the least.
And the divide isn't just in the damage assessments, it's deeply, deeply rooted in the fundamental narrative of who is actually at fault. CENTCOM's official stance is that their massive strikes were a direct, absolutely necessary retaliation meant to impose a heavy cost on Iran for violating the ceasefire by attacking commercial shipping. But if you contrast that with the official stance from Tehran, it's a completely different story. Iran's top negotiator and parliament speaker Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf firmly accuses the United States of breaking the ceasefire first. He points directly to the renewed oil sanctions and what Iran calls a blatant act of unprovoked military aggression.
So the really crucial point here is just how entrenched both sides have become politically. Tehran has dug in entirely. Just listen to the absolute resolve in the statement from Speaker Kalibaf. The era of bullying and extortion is over. We don't fold. And following those U.S. strikes, Iran's top joint military command promised what they called a crushing response. This isn't just political rhetoric anymore. This is a crystal-clear signal that the diplomatic off-ramps are rapidly closing and both nations are publicly, firmly committing to their respective military postures.
And that leads us straight into Section 3, Global Reaction and the Unknown.
With two geopolitical heavyweights trading blows and the ceasefire officially dead, the rest of the world is scrambling right now. We're already seeing this rapid international polarization. At that Ankara summit, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte took a very firm stance. He publicly backed the American response, calling the fresh U.S. strikes absolutely necessary to enforce the ceasefire. Meanwhile, the European Union's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, issued a very strong condemnation of Iran's attacks on Bahrain and Kuwait, calling them entirely unacceptable. Kallas is moving quickly now, announcing an urgent Monday meeting with her Gulf counterparts, and their primary, frankly desperate goal right now, trying to somehow salvage freedom of navigation in both the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea before global trade is entirely paralyzed.
And as all these global leaders scramble, there's this deeply somber and honestly incredibly ironic event unfolding on the ground in Iran right now. Hundreds of thousands of mourners have packed the streets of Tehran for a massive, days-long funeral procession. This is the funeral for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's late supreme leader. Now, if you recall our timeline from earlier, he was killed all the way back on February 28th. His funeral actually had to be delayed for months due to the raging war, and it was only made possible by that temporary ceasefire. The tragic irony here is that this long-delayed procession for the late leader is finally happening at the exact moment that the very ceasefire allowing it to take place completely collapses around them.
Which leaves us all staring at a very, very precarious horizon. That funeral in Tehran isn't taking place against a backdrop of impending peace. It's happening right on the precipice of a renewed, much wider global conflict. Diplomacy is currently on hold, missiles are actively flying across borders, and the global economy is collectively holding its breath as vital shipping lanes are threatened and oil prices spike. So I want to leave you with this. With the interim peace deal officially over, and both sides promising severe consequences, what happens next in the Gulf? And how will it impact the rest of us? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Make sure you keep your eyes on the news and never stop asking questions.